The rain hammered Lagos streets like bullets from an angry sky, each drop carrying the weight of betrayal and broken promises. 22-year-old Amina Adebayo sat crumpled against the iron gates of what had been her home just hours before, clutching a cracked photograph of her father while her stepmother Folak threw her meager belongings into the muddy street. The expensive silk jewel on Folak's head remained perfectly dry under the covered porch, a stark contrast to Amina's soaked university uniform and tear-streaked face. Security guards changed the locks with mechanical precision, while neighbors peered through curtains, their silence more deafening than thunder. But across the rain-slicked street, a black Mercedes SUV sat with its engine purring, tinted windows concealing a figure whose diamond cufflinks caught lightning flashes as he adjusted his sleeve. The watching stranger leaned forward, his jaw tightening as he witnessed what could only be described as a calculated destruction of innocence. Who was this mysterious observer, and why did his presence feel like the calm before an even greater storm? The night held secrets that would soon transform this scene of cruelty into something far more powerful than anyone could imagine. "Your father is dead, you foolish village girl." Folak's voice cut through the storm like a machete through sugarcane, each word designed to wound and humiliate. "This house belongs to me now, and I have no room for pretenders and parasites." In her manicured hands, she held a burning document, Amina's birth certificate, watching the flames consume the young woman's very identity before her eyes. The security guards, clearly well paid for their silence, continued loading Amina's possessions into the street. Her mother's old wrapper, university textbooks that represented years of sacrifice, wooden carvings her father had lovingly bought from village markets. Each item landed with a splash in the growing puddles, symbolic of dreams drowning in the cruelty of those who should have protected them. Folak's biological son, Kemi, emerged from the house, his eyes unable to meet his stepsister's pleading gaze, shame and greed warring visibly across his features. The neighbors who had once praised Amina's academic achievements now turned away, their cowardice exposed by the storm's harsh light. But then, Folaki revealed something that made Amina's blood freeze in her veins. Legal documents claiming her father's will left everything to his legitimate family, effectively erasing 22 years of love and belonging with the stroke of a forged pen. To understand how a beloved daughter became a discarded orphan, one must journey back to where this tale truly began, the small Yoruba village of Ijero, where red earth holds memories like precious gems and tradition flows through daily life like the rhythm of talking drums. Amina's story started in a modest compound where her father, Babatunde Adebayo, built a textile business that was the pride of the region, his hand-woven kente cloths sought after from Lagos to London. Her mother, Aduni, was known throughout the village for her melodious voice that could make even the ancestors smile, and her gentle hands that could heal both fabric and wounded hearts. When Amina was 7, her mother lay dying, her frail fingers stroking her daughter's cornrowed hair while delivering words that would echo through destiny. "Remember this always, my child. Your kindness will be your crown. No matter how dark the night becomes, the morning sun will find those with pure hearts." Young Amina nodded solemnly, not fully comprehending that these words were both blessing and prophecy. For 3 years after his wife's death, Babatunde devoted himself entirely to his daughter and his craft, teaching her the intricate patterns of their ancestral weaving traditions while building a business empire that would span 3 states. But then, Folak arrived in Ijero like a sudden storm, beautiful and sophisticated, carrying the intoxicating scent of Lagos perfume and promises of cosmopolitan dreams. She claimed to be visiting relatives, but village gossips whispered that she had heard about the prosperous widower and his growing fortune. 10-year-old Amina watched with growing unease as this elegant stranger studied their home with calculating eyes, her gaze lingering on valuable kente cloths and her fingers touching surfaces as if mentally appraising their worth. "Papa," Amina whispered one evening while helping sort the latest textile collection. "The new woman looks at our things like she's counting cowrie shells." Babatunde chuckled, his weathered hands gentle in his daughter's hair, unable to see the predator hidden beneath Folek's charming exterior. Within 6 months, wedding drums echoed through Ijero as Babatunde married his second wife, believing he was providing Amina with a mother's love while gaining a partner for his prosperity. The villagers celebrated with palm wine and traditional praise songs, not knowing they were witnessing the beginning of a carefully orchestrated deception. Folake brought her teenage son Kemi into their home, and for a brief moment, it seemed like their compound had become a place of renewed joy and expanded family bonds. The first signs of trouble appeared like cracks in a seemingly solid wall, small enough to dismiss, but deep enough to eventually bring down entire structures. When Amina won the Regional Academic Excellence Award, Folek was conveniently absent, claiming a sudden headache that mysteriously disappeared once the ceremony ended. When the girl graduated top of her secondary school class, her stepmother ensured the celebration dinner focused on Kemi's mediocre football achievements instead, diminishing Amina's accomplishments with cutting remarks about village girl aspirations. "Why must we constantly hear about academic achievements?" Folek would mutter, her voice carrying just far enough for Amina to hear. "In Lagos, real intelligence means understanding how the world actually works, not burying your nose in dusty books." The subtle cruelties multiplied like termites in wet wood, each small wound carefully designed to avoid detection while systematically destroying the young woman's confidence. Amina's university application was accidentally submitted late. Her acceptance letter from the University of Ibadan was misplaced until Folek's friend's daughter needed a replacement opportunity. Even her father seemed oblivious to the psychological warfare being waged under his own roof, his love for his new wife blinding him to her calculated malice toward his daughter. At university, Amina felt the weight of being different in ways that cut deeper than poverty or social status. Her classmates arrived in expensive cars, while she took crowded Danfo buses, their designer clothes contrasting sharply with her carefully mended traditional attire. They spoke casually of family connections in government and business while she talked about her father's village workshop and the annual yam festivals of her childhood. But rather than letting these differences embitter her, Amina threw herself into her studies with a determination that impressed even her most privileged classmates. Her professors noted her exceptional analytical skills and her unique perspective on African business practices, often inviting her to present her research at academic conferences. She worked part-time in the university library to supplement her modest allowance, sending most of her earnings back to help village children pay school fees. Her roommates marveled at her ability to maintain academic excellence while juggling multiple responsibilities, never suspecting that she was driven by her mother's dying words about kindness being her crown. During holiday visits home, however, she began noticing disturbing changes in her father's demeanor and troubling conversations that stopped abruptly whenever she entered a room, as if secrets were being kept from the very person they most concerned. During her second year at university, ominous changes began manifesting in the family compound that would have alarmed anyone paying closer attention to details. Babatunde looked increasingly tired and distracted, his once bright eyes now shadowed with worry lines that hadn't been there before Folek's arrival. Phone conversations ceased abruptly when Amina appeared, and her stepmother began taking mysterious trips to Lagos, always returning with expensive purchases, but offering vague explanations about business meetings and investment opportunities. The textile workshop that had once buzzed with creative energy now felt tense, with workers whispering among themselves and casting nervous glances toward the main house. Folake's son, Kemi, now in his early 20s, had transformed from a merely lazy teenager into something more sinister, a young man whose eyes held the calculating coldness of someone who had learned to see family members as obstacles to overcome rather than bonds to cherish. "Papa, are you feeling well?" Amina asked during one weekend visit, noting how her father's hands trembled slightly while examining his latest cloth designs. His smile was forced, his reassurance hollow. "Just business concerns, my daughter. Nothing for you to worry about." But late that night, she overheard a conversation that would shatter her understanding of everything she thought she knew about her family and her future. The conversation that changed everything happened on a humid night, when the compound walls seemed thin as whispers and secrets traveled on currents of betrayal. Amina had awakened thirsty and was tiptoeing toward the kitchen when Folake's voice drifted through the darkness like poison in the air. "Yes, the paperwork is ready. Once he signs the new will, everything transfers to Kemi automatically. The village girl won't even know what happened until it's too late." Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird as she crept closer to the window, bare feet silent on the concrete floor. "The lawyer confirmed it," Folake continued, her voice carrying the satisfaction of a predator savoring anticipated victory. "As long as she's not officially adopted, she has no legal claim. And since we never completed those adoption papers Babatunde kept talking about, well, blood may be thicker than water, but legal documents are thicker than both." The words hit Amina like physical blows, each revelation more devastating than the last. She wasn't legally her father's daughter. Everything she had believed about her place in the world was built on quicksand. Her entire existence was based on love and tradition, rather than law and documentation, making her vulnerable to exactly the kind of legal manipulation her stepmother was orchestrating. The morning sun would rise on a different world than the one she had known just hours before. 2 weeks after overhearing that devastating conversation, fate made the choice for Amina in the most brutal way possible. Babatunde collapsed during a business meeting in Lagos, his strong body finally succumbing to the stress of secrets he had been carrying and the weight of decisions he couldn't bring himself to make. The doctors called it a sudden heart attack, but Amina suspected her father had died from the burden of knowing what was being planned against his daughter, while feeling powerless to prevent it. In his final moments at Lagos University Teaching Hospital, surrounded by the antiseptic smell of medicine and the steady beeping of machines, her father gripped her hand with surprising strength. "Amina," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the mechanical sounds keeping him alive. "In my old kente cloth, the one with gold threads, there's something important, something that will protect you when I can't." His eyes held urgency that transcended his failing body, a message more vital than his labored breathing. Before she could ask what he meant, before she could demand explanations or beg him to stay, the machines began their terrible, final song. That night, as family members gathered for traditional mourning ceremonies, Folake moved with the efficiency of a woman who had been rehearsing this moment for years, announcing funeral arrangements and will details, while Amina sat frozen in grief and growing understanding of just how thoroughly she had been betrayed. The morning after the funeral became the dawn of Amina's systematic destruction, orchestrated with the precision of a military campaign designed to leave no survivors or witnesses. Her stepbrother Kemi arrived at her door with eyes that couldn't meet hers, shame and greed warring visibly across his features as he delivered news that would shatter her remaining illusions about family loyalty. "Amina," he said, his voice cracking like an adolescent boy's despite his 25 years, "I need to tell you about Papa's business debts." She looked up from packing her university books, hope flickering briefly that perhaps this conversation would offer clarity about her father's final words. "There's massive debt," Kemi continued, pulling out a folder thick with official documents bearing stamps and signatures. "More than the business is worth. Mama says we have to sell everything just to avoid bankruptcy. The loan agreements, equipment financing contracts, and supplier credit arrangements were all dated within the last 6 months of her father's life, each page a nail in the coffin of her inheritance. But as she examined the documents more closely, her trained eye caught inconsistencies that made her hands tremble with recognition. The signatures were forgeries, skillfully done but unmistakably different from the handwriting she had known since childhood. When she pointed this out, Kemi's mask slipped completely, revealing the stranger her stepbrother had become. "Are you calling me a liar?" Kemi's voice turned cold with inherited cruelty, his transformation from awkward teenager to calculating adversary now complete. "Are you saying our mother forged documents?" The word "our" hung in the air like a challenge, deliberately emphasizing Amina's outsider status in what had once been her own family. Before she could respond, he delivered the killing blow with surgical precision. "Our family? Amina, you're not family. Not legally. Not anymore. The adoption papers Papa promised to file? He never completed them. You have no claim to anything here." He threw legal documents on her bed like weapons designed to wound: birth certificates, adoption records, inheritance laws, all confirming her worst fears about her legal vulnerability. The papers spelled out in black and white what Folake had whispered in the darkness. Amina Aduni, daughter of a dead woman, had no legal father. This house, this business, this entire life she had built, none of it belonged to her in the eyes of the law. But then came an even crueler betrayal when her childhood friend Temitope arrived with tears streaming down her face and secrets that would shatter 20 years of trust. "I have to tell you something," Temi whispered, her voice breaking like pottery dropped on stone. "I've been reporting to Mama Folake. Everything you told me about university, your plans, your dreams, I passed it all along. The girl who had shared her deepest secrets, who had sworn sisterhood under starlit village skies, had been bought and sold for a few thousand naira. The legal system that should have protected an orphaned daughter instead became another weapon in Folake's arsenal of systematic destruction. At the lawyer's office in Lagos, Amina found herself facing Barrister Adeyemi, a man whose expensive suit couldn't disguise the shifty quality of his character or the calculated cruelty in his dealings with the powerless. "Miss Aduni," he said deliberately, refusing to acknowledge her connection to Babatunde by using only her mother's surname. "I understand you have concerns about your late guardian's estate." The word guardian tasted like poison in the air between them, a legal technicality designed to diminish decades of paternal love into mere temporary care. Behind his desk, partially hidden by law books, sat a photograph of him shaking hands with Folake at an expensive Lagos restaurant, both smiling like conspirators sharing profitable secrets. "You've been working with her all along," Amina realized, the pieces of the conspiracy finally clicking into place with devastating clarity. The lawyer's smile was thin as a knife blade, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to destroying lives with legal documentation. Mrs. Folake Adebayo is my client, and she has instructed me to inform you that any harassment of her family, any false claims against the estate, any attempts to disrupt the legitimate transfer of property will result in serious legal consequences. The very law that should have been her shield had been transformed into her enemy's sword, wielded by people who sold justice to the highest bidder. The final and most devastating betrayal came from the very community that had watched Amina grow from infant to accomplished young woman. The traditional authorities who should have been guardians of justice and protectors of the orphaned. Back in Ijero village, she appealed to the council of elders beneath the ancient Iroko tree, where generations had sought wisdom and fairness, believing that traditional justice would succeed where modern law had failed. These were men who had blessed her naming ceremony, who had praised her academic achievements, who had called her our daughter when she brought honor to the village through her university success. But when she arrived at the sacred meeting ground, she discovered that Folake had preceded her there with bribes disguised as community development gifts. The eldest council member, Baba Adesanya, looked at her with eyes clouded by age and something more troubling, shame, guilt, and the hollow look of integrity compromised. "Amina, my child," he said, his voice weaker than she remembered. "We have heard claims from both sides. We have considered the evidence. The evidence consisted of legal papers provided by corrupt lawyers and medical reports claiming her father's mind had been affected by his final illness, documents that painted a picture of a confused old man making promises he couldn't keep to a daughter who wasn't legally his responsibility. Even more devastating was learning that Folake had donated a new borehole to the village, repaired the school roof, and promised to expand the health clinic, using money stolen from Amina's own inheritance to buy the silence and complicity of the very people who should have been her protectors. That night, wandering through her village in defeat, Amina found herself drawn to her father's old workshop, now padlocked and already showing signs of abandonment, despite being empty for only weeks. Through a broken board in the wall, she could see his collection of kente cloths still hanging on their frames like abandoned dreams gathering dust. Remembering his final words about the cloth with gold threads, she squeezed through the gap in the wall, ignoring splinters that tore at her clothes like the obstacles that had torn at her life. In the corner, draped over a wooden frame like a royal banner forgotten by time, hung her father's masterpiece, a kente cloth woven with threads of gold so fine they seemed to capture starlight and hold it prisoner in their intricate patterns. With trembling hands, she lifted the precious fabric, feeling along its edges for anything unusual, her fingers guided by desperate hope and her father's dying words. Hidden in the hem, sewn with the same careful precision her father brought to all his work, she found a small object that made her heart race with possibility. Inside was a digital storage device and a brass key, both wrapped in cloth that smelled faintly of her father's favorite palm wine and the incense from his morning prayers. But before she could examine her discovery properly, voices outside the workshop shattered the night silence. "She's in there!" Kemi's voice cut through the darkness with the triumph of a hunter who had tracked his prey to its final hiding place. "I saw her break in." Security guards hired by Folake surrounded the workshop like Amina was a common thief rather than a daughter seeking connection to her father's memory. Flashlights blazed through the broken walls, turning the sacred space of her father's creativity into an interrogation scene designed to humiliate and intimidate. "Stealing from the dead now, are we?" Folake's voice carried the cold satisfaction of someone who had anticipated this moment and prepared for it accordingly. This is what desperation does to people. It turns them into criminals who violate the resting places of the deceased. As the guards dragged her from the workshop, Amina clutched the kente cloth to her chest, feeling the hidden devices pressing against her ribs like secret promises waiting to be fulfilled. The accusations of theft stung less than the realization that even her grief was being weaponized against her, that even seeking comfort in her father's memory had been transformed into evidence of her supposed criminal nature. But what she didn't notice in her distress was the black Mercedes parked beyond the village square, its engine running quietly while a figure inside spoke into his phone with quiet authority. "Yes, sir." She found it. "The storage device is secure. Now we wait for the right moment to reveal what her father really left behind." The game was about to change dramatically, but first, Amina would have to endure 3 weeks of sleeping under Lagos bridges, learning that rock bottom had trap doors leading to even deeper levels of despair and abandonment. 3 weeks of homelessness taught Amina lessons about survival that no university course could have provided, but also about the kindness of strangers that restored her faith in humanity when family had failed her completely. Under the third mainland bridge, she found a community of forgotten people who shared their meager meals and offered protection from both weather and predators who stalked the vulnerable in the darkness. The kente cloth became her blanket, her pillow, her connection to better times, while the hidden storage device remained her secret hope for justice that seemed increasingly impossible to achieve. She worked odd jobs in markets and bus stations, saving every kobo while studying the contents of her father's final gift during stolen moments of privacy. The digital device contained video recordings, financial documents, and correspondence that painted a picture of systematic fraud so comprehensive and well documented that even corrupt officials would struggle to ignore its implications. But without money for lawyers or connections to people with power, the truth felt as useless as rain during drought season, precious but unable to reach the places where it was most desperately needed. Her clothes grew shabby, her shoes developed holes, and her stomach learned the hollow ache of irregular meals, but her spirit remained unbroken because her mother's words about kindness being her crown had taken root so deeply that external circumstances couldn't uproot them. What she didn't know was that her suffering was being observed by someone with the power to transform her situation, someone who had been waiting for the right moment to honor a debt that transcended money and touched the deepest obligations of the human heart. The black Mercedes appeared again on a morning when despair felt heavier than the humid Lagos air, its sleek presence commanding attention from everyone in the vicinity, like royalty visiting the forgotten corners of society. When the door opened, a man stepped out who seemed to carry authority in his very bones, his presence transforming the space around him from a place of desperation into something that felt charged with possibility. He was tall, dark-skinned, with silver threading through his carefully trimmed beard like wisdom made visible, wearing a traditional agbada that was hand-embroidered with gold thread, but paired with Italian leather shoes worth more than most people's annual income. "Miss Adebayo," he said, and his voice carried the quiet power of someone accustomed to being heard and obeyed. "My name is Adebayo Okafor. I knew your father, and I've been watching your stepmother's activities for months." Amina clutched the kente cloth tighter, suspicious of anyone who might represent another trap or manipulation in a world that had already betrayed her beyond measure. "Are you another lawyer? Another person Folak sent to threaten me into disappearing completely?" Something flickered across the stranger's face, surprise perhaps, or respect for her caution in a situation where most people would have been overwhelmed by desperation. "I am many things, young woman, but I am not your enemy. Your father saved my life once, and now I intend to return that favor by saving yours." But then he said something that made the morning air itself seem to vibrate with potential. "I've been investigating your stepmother's fraud for months, and she made one crucial mistake. She tried to steal from a man who left his most precious secrets with someone she never suspected existed." The drive to Adebayo's office in Victoria Island revealed a Lagos most people never experienced: penthouses that pierced clouds like modern towers of Babel, boardrooms where fortunes changed hands with the casualness of market transactions, a world where power moved in currents invisible to ordinary citizens, but felt by everyone nonetheless. "Who are you really?" Amina asked as they rode the elevator to the 47th floor, her voice carrying the wariness of someone who had learned that generous gestures often came with hidden costs. "I'm what people call a billionaire now," Adebayo replied, with a slight smile that held both pride and humility. "But 30 years ago, I was a village boy from Ijero, whose family couldn't afford secondary school fees. Your father gave me my first job, taught me about fabrics and business, treated me like the son he didn't yet have." The elevator doors opened to reveal an office that looked like a fusion of traditional African artistry and contemporary luxury, where kente patterns were woven into modern furniture designs and ancient Yoruba carvings sat beside state-of-the-art technology. The walls displayed photographs spanning decades, showing the progression from humble village workshops to international fashion shows. But in one corner, Amina spotted an image that made her heart skip: her father standing beside a young man who was unmistakably Adebayo, both covered in textile dyes and smiling with the genuine affection of family. "When I made my first million," Adebayo continued, settling behind a desk carved from a single piece of ebony wood, "I came back to thank your father and offer to repay everything he had invested in my education and future. But he refused my money and asked for something else instead. He made me promise," Adebayo continued, his voice growing softer with memory and weighted with obligation, "that if anything ever happened to him, if his daughter ever needed protection from people who would use her kindness against her, I would be her shield against the world's cruelty." The promise hung in the air between them like a sacred oath, connecting past generosity to present necessity through bonds stronger than legal contracts. 6 months before he died, your father contacted me with concerns about Folake's behavior and suspicious requests for him to sign documents he didn't understand. He asked me to investigate her background quietly. Adebayo pressed a button on his desk, and a wall screen descended from the ceiling, displaying photographs, financial records, and legal documents that told a story of predatory calculations spanning years. Your stepmother is not who she claims to be. Her real name is Foluke Ogundipe, and she has done this before: married wealthy widowers, manipulated inheritance laws, stolen from grieving children across 3 states. The screen showed newspaper clippings with headlines that made Amina's stomach turn. "Widow accused of inheritance fraud in Kano." "Lagos, businessman's children sue stepmother." "Ogun state property dispute involves forged will." Each article revealed the same pattern of seduction, marriage, systematic asset transfer, and abandonment of stepchildren who had no legal recourse against her methods. "She's a professional predator who has perfected the art of legal theft," Adebayo explained, his voice carrying both disgust and admiration for the thoroughness of her criminal enterprise. "But your father was smarter than she gave him credit for, and he created a backup plan that she never suspected existed. The storage device you found contains more than just evidence," Adebayo revealed, his fingers dancing across his desk controls to display new information on the wall screen. "It holds video recordings of her meetings with corrupt lawyers, audio of her planning to forge his will, financial records showing systematic asset transfers, and correspondence with other victims of her schemes across West Africa. The evidence unfolded before Amina like a masterclass in organized crime, each document building a case so comprehensive that even the most corrupt officials would struggle to ignore its implications. Your father spent his final months gathering proof of everything she was planning, creating an insurance policy that would protect you, even if he couldn't survive to defend you personally. But then Adebayo revealed something that made the entire situation even more complex and emotionally charged. "There's something else you need to understand about why this case matters so deeply to me," he said, his professional demeanor softening to reveal something more personal underneath. "I didn't just fall in love with the idea of justice for your father's memory. I fell in love with you." The confession hung in the air like incense, transforming a business meeting into something far more intimate and consequential. "Your father would tell me stories about your kindness, your intelligence, your refusal to let hardship make you bitter or cruel. When I watched you being thrown from your home that night, when I saw you choose dignity over revenge, when you protected that kente cloth like it held the secrets of the universe, which it did, I knew your father had been right about your character." The revelation transformed everything about their interaction, adding layers of emotion and possibility that Amina hadn't been prepared to consider in her desperate circumstances. Before Amina could process the full implications of Adebayo's confession, the office doors burst open with the force of people accustomed to getting their way through intimidation and legal manipulation. Folake strode in flanked by two men in expensive suits, her lawyer Barrister Adeyemi, and another man who carried himself with the arrogant authority of someone who had grown fat on corruption. "Mr. Okafor," Folake said, her voice dripping with false sweetness designed to mask the venom underneath. "I understand you've been filling my stepdaughter's head with lies and fantasies that could only lead to disappointment." Adebayo didn't stand or acknowledge her presence with anything more than a slight raising of his eyebrow, his calm demeanor more insulting than any verbal response could have been. "Mrs. Ogundipe," he replied, deliberately using her real name rather than her stolen identity, "or should I address you by one of your other married names from your previous fraud convictions?" For the first time since Amina had known her, Folak's composure cracked slightly, revealing the calculating predator beneath the sophisticated exterior. "This is Commissioner Adebayo," Folake said, gesturing to the man beside her lawyer with the desperation of someone playing their final card. "He's here to inform you that harboring a criminal suspect is itself a crime under Nigerian law." The commissioner stepped forward with the swagger of a man who had grown accustomed to selling justice to the highest bidder, his uniform decorated with medals that represented successful acts of corruption rather than actual service to the people. "Mr. Okafor, this young woman is wanted for questioning regarding theft of family property, forgery of documents, and making false claims against a grieving widow," he announced with the hollow authority of someone reading from a script written by people who controlled his paycheck. But then Adebayo smiled, with the quiet confidence of someone who held all the winning cards in a game his opponents didn't even realize they were playing. "Commissioner Adebayo," he said with calm precision, "tell me, how much did Mrs. Ogundipe pay you to fabricate these charges? Was it more or less than the 2 million naira she gave you to ignore the fraud investigation in Kano 3 years ago?" The wall screen now displayed bank transfer records, photographs of the commissioner and Folak at expensive restaurants, recorded phone conversations discussing specific bribery amounts and methods for suppressing evidence. The commissioner's face transformed from arrogant authority to sweating panic as his career and freedom evaporated before his eyes. "This is fabricated evidence. You can't prove anything," he stammered, but his protest carried the hollow ring of someone who knew they had been caught completely. "I can prove everything," Adebayo replied, rising from his chair with the slow, deliberate movement of a predator preparing to deliver the killing blow. "When you have enough money and enough patience, you can hire the best investigators in Africa. You can access bank records, phone transcripts, travel documentation, surveillance footage. You can build cases so comprehensive that even the most corrupt judge couldn't ignore them without exposing themselves to federal investigation." Folak's sophisticated mask was now completely shattered, revealing the desperate criminal who had been hiding behind expensive clothes and practiced charm. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," she threatened, but her voice carried the high pitch of fear rather than confidence. "I have connections you can't imagine, people who will destroy you for interfering in family business." But Adebayo's next revelation would prove that her connections were nothing compared to the network of justice he had been building for months in preparation for this exact moment. People like Judge Babangida. Adebayo interrupted with surgical precision. "The one you paid $50,000 to rule against Amina's inheritance claim? Or Police Superintendent Williams, who agreed to dismiss fraud complaints in exchange for his son's admission to an expensive private school? Perhaps you mean Governor Adeyemi, who promised to protect your business interests in exchange for campaign contributions that violated federal election laws." The wall screen now displayed a web of corruption so vast and detailed that even Folake seemed stunned into temporary silence by its comprehensiveness. Bank records, email correspondence, phone transcripts, video surveillance, witness statements. The evidence formed a picture of systematic corruption that reached into every level of Nigerian society. "The mistake you made, Mrs. Ogundipe, was assuming that because Babatunde was a simple village businessman, his allies would be equally simple and powerless. You never imagined that his kindness to a poor boy would create a debt that would be repaid with the power to destroy your entire criminal enterprise." But then came the moment that would transform this confrontation from a business dispute into something far more dramatic and emotionally charged. "Amina," Adebayo said, turning to face her with eyes that held something deeper than justice or business obligation. "There's one more thing your father's storage device contains that will change everything you understand about this situation." The screen filled with her father's face, slightly pale but unmistakably coherent, sitting in what appeared to be a law office she had never seen before, speaking directly to the camera with the solemnity of someone delivering final testament. "If you are watching this, my beloved daughter." Her father's recorded voice filled the room with the weight of messages from beyond the grave. "It means that God has called me home, and the predators have begun their attack. But I want you to know that everything I built, everything I dreamed, was always meant for you and the family you would create." Her father's video will continued with devastating legal precision, each word carefully chosen to protect his daughter and destroy those who would harm her. The textile business, the house in Lagos, the compound in Ijero, the land holdings across 3 states, and all associated assets belong entirely to my daughter, Amina Aduni Adebayo, his voice declared with the authority of someone who had planned for every possible challenge to his wishes. "I have also established a trust fund for her education and future endeavors, managed by my dear friend, Adebayo Okafor, who has proven himself to be a man of integrity and honor throughout our decades of friendship." But then, the recording revealed information that made even Folake gasp with recognition of how thoroughly she had been outmaneuvered. "Furthermore, I am fully aware that my wife Folak has been attempting to manipulate legal documents, forge my signature, and conspire with corrupt officials to steal my daughter's inheritance. I have documented evidence of these activities, including recordings of her planning sessions, financial records of her bribes, and testimony from witnesses she believed were safely bought. The screen filled with surveillance footage showing Folak meeting with lawyers in secret, audio recordings of her discussing forgery techniques, and financial transactions that traced stolen money through multiple accounts designed to hide her theft. But then came the revelation that no one in the room saw coming. The twist that would transform this story from a tale of justice into something far more profound and emotionally resonant. "There's one more thing," Adebayo said, his professional demeanor melting away to reveal vulnerability that made him seem more human than powerful. "Amina, your father didn't just ask me to protect your inheritance. In his final days, he shared with me his greatest regret, that he hadn't found a way to shield you from the beginning, that his love for you had somehow made you vulnerable to the very people who should have protected you." The room fell into stunned silence as everyone processed the implications of what was about to be revealed. "He asked me to do more than preserve your financial legacy. He asked me to love you the way you deserve to be loved, to be the family you lost, to stand by you not just as a business partner or legal guardian, but as a husband, if you would have me." The proposal hung in the air like incense, transforming a legal confrontation into something sacred and deeply personal. "You're proposing marriage?" Amina whispered, her mind struggling to process everything that had happened in the space of a single morning. "I'm honoring a dying man's wish while following my own heart," Adebayo replied with simple honesty that cut through all the complexity of their situation. "I fell in love with your character long before I met you in person. Your father would tell me stories about your kindness, your intelligence, your refusal to let hardship poison your spirit. This is ridiculous." Folak finally found her voice, desperation making her words sharp and frantic as her carefully constructed world collapsed around her like a house built on shifting sand. "You can't buy a wife like you purchase a business contract. This is still Africa. There are traditions, customs, proper procedures that must be followed." But Adebayo's smile could have powered the entire Lagos electrical grid, radiating confidence and cultural knowledge that ran deeper than her superficial understanding of tradition and custom. "Mrs. Ogundipe, I'm about to show you exactly how African traditions work when they're backed by justice instead of corruption, when they serve love instead of greed, when they honor ancestors instead of dishonoring their memory." He pressed one final button on his desk, and the office doors opened to reveal something that took everyone's breath away and transformed the sterile corporate environment into something magical and sacred. A full traditional wedding procession entered the room. Drummers in elaborate Agbada robes whose rhythms seemed to make the building itself dance with ancestral energy. Praise singers whose voices could wake ancestors from their eternal rest and call down blessings from the spirit world. Elderly women carrying kola nuts and palm wine with the reverence of priestesses performing sacred rituals that connected the living to the dead. Most shocking of all, the village elders from Ijero appeared, led by Baba Adesanya himself, their faces glowing with something that looked like redemption, seeking expression through concrete actions rather than empty words. The transformation of the office space into a traditional ceremony ground proved that justice and culture could work together to heal wounds that seemed too deep for healing. "What is this?" Amina stammered, overwhelmed by the sudden transformation of her reality, from courtroom drama to cultural celebration, from legal confrontation to spiritual ceremony that seemed to bridge heaven and earth. "My child," Baba Adesanya stepped forward, his aged voice trembling with emotion that decades of experience couldn't quite contain. "We have come to correct a terrible wrong that we allowed to happen under our watch, to restore honor that should never have been taken from you." The village council that had rejected her just weeks before now stood before her with humility that transformed their authority from something that oppressed into something that blessed and healed. When Mr. Okafor showed us the evidence of Mrs. Ogundipe's deception, another elder continued, shame and determination warring in his weathered features. "When we learned how we had been manipulated into betraying one of our own daughters, we knew we had to make amends for our failure to protect you when protection was most needed." The elders, who had been bought by Folak's bribes, now prostrated themselves in genuine remorse that went beyond mere apology into the realm of spiritual repentance and community healing. "The borehole she donated to our village?" Baba Adesanya's voice carried the weight of painful realization. "Built with money stolen from your father's business. The school roof repairs, paid for with your rightful inheritance. The clinic expansion, funded with assets that belonged to you by right of blood and love. The confession of their complicity in her suffering was painful but necessary, clearing the air for genuine reconciliation and restoration of trust between Amina and the community that had raised her from childhood. The traditional wedding ceremony that followed was unlike anything Lagos had ever witnessed, a fusion of ancient wisdom and modern justice that would be remembered for generations and retold in stories that would inspire countless others. While police officers led Folake, her corrupt lawyer, and the compromised commissioner away in handcuffs, while news crews gathered outside to document the arrest of one of Nigeria's most notorious inheritance fraud networks. Inside the Okafor building, two souls were being joined in the way their ancestors had always intended marriages to be, as unions that strengthened communities and honored the wisdom of those who came before. Amina wore a traditional iro and buba crafted from her father's finest kente cloth, the very fabric that had hidden the evidence which saved her life and exposed her enemies' crimes against family and justice. The gold threads that had once concealed digital secrets now caught the light like captured starfire, transforming her from victim into queen before everyone's eyes and proving that suffering could indeed be transformed into beauty when justice prevailed. Adebayo was resplendent in an agbada that incorporated traditional Yoruba patterns with contemporary elegance, a perfect symbol of their union between ancestral wisdom and modern possibilities, between respect for the past and hope for the future. "Do you take this woman?" Baba Adesanya asked in Yoruba, his voice carrying the authority of countless generations who had witnessed such ceremonies. "To be your wife, your partner in prosperity and adversity, your companion in this life and your bridge to the ancestors who watch over us all." The question carried weight that legal contracts could never contain, binding the couple not just to each other, but to the community and the traditions that had shaped their values. "I do," Adebayo replied, first in English, then in Yoruba, then in Igbo, acknowledging the diverse heritage that made Nigeria beautiful and strong, his words carrying weight that legal contracts could never contain. The simple words bound him to promises that transcended wealth and touched the deepest obligations of the human heart, connecting him not just to Amina, but to her ancestors and to the children they would raise together in wisdom and love. "Do you take this man?" the elder asked Amina with ceremonial gravity that made the moment feel both intimate and universal. "To be your husband, your protector without domination, your provider without ownership, your equal in all things that matter to the human spirit and the continuation of our people's values?" Amina looked into Adebayo's eyes and saw not just wealth or power, but the same kindness her father had possessed, the same integrity her mother had prayed she would find in a world that often rewarded cruelty over compassion. "I do," she said, her voice carrying across the room like a bell, announcing freedom from everything that had tried to destroy her spirit and rob her of her rightful place in the world. The kola nut ceremony followed with prayers for fertility, prosperity, and the blessing of unborn generations who would inherit not just material wealth but the values that had made this moment possible. Palm wine was shared among the elders, sealing bonds that corruption had tried to break but could never truly destroy when they were rooted in genuine love and mutual respect. The praise singers told the story of how love conquered betrayal, how patience defeated greed, how justice arrived like the morning sun after the darkest night that seemed would never end. The news that completed their triumph came as the wedding celebration continued around them, proving that justice properly served creates ripples that extend far beyond the immediate participants in any conflict. Adebayo's head of security approached with updates that had everyone cheering and ululating with joy. "Sir, the arrests are proceeding according to plan. Mrs. Ogundipe is being charged with inheritance fraud, document forgery, conspiracy, bribery, and federal corruption. Her son Kemi has agreed to testify against her in exchange for a reduced sentence and mandatory community service. Commissioner Adebayo faces immediate removal from office and federal corruption charges that could result in 20 years imprisonment. Barrister Adeyemi's law license has been permanently revoked, and he's facing disbarment proceedings that will prevent him from practicing law anywhere in West Africa." The systematic destruction of the corruption network that had tried to destroy Amina proved that evil, no matter how well organized or powerful it seemed, could not ultimately triumph over truth, backed by sufficient resources and determination. "What about the stolen assets and the other victims?" Amina asked, her concern extending beyond her own restoration to the wider circle of people who had suffered from Folek's predatory schemes. "Everything taken from your father's estate is being restored immediately with interest and damages," the security chief reported with satisfaction that came from seeing justice properly served. "The textile business, the family compounds, the investment accounts, all of it is legally yours again. Additionally, Mrs. Ogundipe's personal assets are being seized to compensate other families she defrauded over the years, ensuring that her victims across 3 states will finally receive the justice they deserve." The comprehensive nature of their victory proved that good triumphing over evil was not just a fairy tale concept, but a real possibility when the right people committed themselves to fighting for what was right. 3 months later, the most satisfying moment of Amina's entire ordeal came when they returned to Ijero for the traditional second ceremony that would complete their union in the eyes of their ancestors and the community that had watched her grow from infant to accomplished woman. The entire village gathered under the ancient Iroko tree, where she had been rejected and humiliated. But this time, she arrived not as a supplicant, begging for justice, but as a queen returning to claim her rightful place in the story of her people. The transformation was so complete that visitors who hadn't witnessed her earlier humiliation could never have imagined the suffering she had endured just months before in this very same location. The elders who had been bought by Folek's bribes now prostrated themselves in genuine remorse that went beyond mere apology into the realm of spiritual repentance that sought to heal the wounds their cowardice had created. The neighbors who had watched her humiliation in cowardly silence now ululated with joy at her restoration, their celebration carrying undertones of relief that justice had prevailed and they were no longer complicit in oppression through their silence. Even her childhood friend Temitope approached with tears streaming down her face and courage that had taken months to build through therapy and spiritual counseling. "Amina," she whispered, her voice breaking with years of guilt and regret. "Can you ever forgive me for betraying our friendship when you needed loyalty most? I was weak, desperate, but that's no excuse for selling your secrets to your enemies and participating in your destruction." The request for forgiveness represented more than personal healing. It symbolized the restoration of trust that communities need to flourish and protect their most vulnerable members from predators who would exploit divisions among neighbors and friends. The reconciliation between Amina and Temitope represented the healing of bonds that corruption had tried to sever, proving that genuine friendship could survive even the worst betrayals when both parties committed themselves to truth and renewed trust. "I forgive you, Temi," Amina said, embracing her friend with warmth that surprised them both and proved that genuine forgiveness could indeed heal wounds that seemed too deep for healing. "But our friendship must be rebuilt on truth this time. No more secrets between us. No more betrayals for money or fear. We must promise each other that we will never again allow outsiders to turn us against our own blood and bonds." The celebration that followed lasted 3 days and 3 nights, establishing new traditions that would be remembered and repeated for generations throughout the region, creating a legacy of hope that would inspire others facing similar challenges. Traditional drummers played rhythms that had echoed through Ijero for centuries, their beats connecting the present moment to ancestral wisdom that transcended individual lifetimes and personal struggles. Master weavers demonstrated techniques that would ensure the village's textile traditions survived another generation, teaching young apprentices skills that no machine could replicate and no foreign influence could destroy or replace. Children who had never seen such prosperity laughed and played games that their grandparents remembered from better times, their joy creating memories that would sustain the community through future challenges and remind everyone that happiness was possible even after the darkest trials. The festival became an annual celebration that would attract visitors from across West Africa, turning Ijero into a destination known for its commitment to justice, traditional crafts, and the triumph of good over evil. 6 months after her marriage, Amina received news that transformed their personal happiness into generational blessing and proved that their story was far from over, but just beginning its next beautiful chapter. The village health worker approached her with information that made her heart leap with recognition of life's most profound miracle. She was pregnant, carrying the next chapter of a story that had seemed destined to end in tragedy and loss. "A new generation," Baba Adesanya declared when he heard the news, his aged voice trembling with emotion that decades of wisdom couldn't quite contain. "A child who will inherit not just material wealth, but spiritual wisdom. Not just property and businesses, but principles and values that will guide them through whatever challenges the future may bring to our people and our land." The praise singers immediately composed new verses celebrating the continuation of bloodlines that honored ancestors, while embracing progress, the triumph of love over hatred, the promise that kindness would be passed down like precious family heirlooms from one generation to the next. As the celebration continued around them, Amina placed her hand on her still flat belly and whispered a promise that connected her unborn child to the legacy of strength that had brought her through her darkest hour. "Little one, you will grow up knowing that justice exists in this world, that good people can triumph over evil, that your character matters more than your circumstances or the accidents of your birth." The pregnancy announcement sparked village-wide festivities that lasted for weeks, with women's groups competing to create the most beautiful baby clothes and men crafting toys that would teach traditional values while entertaining modern children. The news spread across the region, inspiring other young women who faced similar challenges to believe that their stories, too, could have happy endings if they refused to surrender their values or abandon hope. The transformation of Folak from predator to penitent had been one of the most surprising developments in their entire story, proving that even the hardest hearts could soften when confronted with genuine consequences and offered genuine redemption rather than mere punishment and abandonment. After serving 3 years in federal prison, she had emerged broken but not bitter, humbled by her experiences and genuinely remorseful for the pain she had caused to multiple families across multiple states through her systematic fraud schemes over many years. Her first act upon release was to seek out Amina, not to ask for money or mercy, but to offer whatever service she could provide to make amends for her crimes against family and community. "I know I can never undo the suffering I caused," she had said, tears streaming down her face as she knelt before the woman she had once tried to destroy. "But if you will allow me, I want to spend whatever years I have left trying to heal some of the wounds I created through my greed and selfishness." Amina had looked into her former stepmother's eyes and seen something she had never expected, genuine repentance that went beyond mere regret into the realm of spiritual transformation that could only come from truly understanding the magnitude of one's sins against innocent people. The decision to forgive had not been easy or immediate, requiring months of prayer, consultation with elders, and deep reflection on what her parents would have wanted her to do in such circumstances. But when forgiveness finally came, it brought with it a peace that surprised everyone involved, proving that mercy multiplied blessings, while revenge only perpetuated cycles of pain and destruction that could consume entire communities. 5 years later, Amina Okafor stood in the renovated textile workshop that had once belonged to her father, now expanded into a thriving African fashion house that employed over 300 people and exported traditional craftsmanship to markets across Europe, America, and Asia, proving that African creativity could compete with and surpass anything the world had to offer. Her 4-year-old daughter, Aduni, played among the looms, while master weavers taught young apprentices techniques that no foreign factory could replicate or steal, ensuring that ancestral knowledge would survive and flourish in the modern world. "Mama," little Aduni asked, pointing to a framed photograph of her grandfather Babatunde that held the place of honor above the main workspace. "Tell me the story again about how kindness became our crown and how good people always win in the end." Amina smiled, lifting her daughter to her hip while workers continued their ancient craft around them, their hands creating beauty that would outlast the political and economic turmoil that periodically swept through their nation like Harmattan winds. The story had become a family legend, told and retold until it took on the power of traditional folklore that shapes character across generations and teaches children what truly matters in life. The end of Amina's story is really just the beginning. Subscribe to hear more stories of courage conquering corruption, love overcoming loss, and the extraordinary power of ordinary people who choose to remain kind when the world gives them every reason to become bitter. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that their character is their crown, that their kindness has power, and that their story, like Amina's, is still being written.